My mind was very blown reading your story. You have such a storied history, and you're such an amazing patriot. I just wanted to say first, thank you so much for doing this and sitting down and being open with your story, because
I appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
thank you for your service as well. But guys, today we got Brad Smith, born in Ohio, 1939, pilot license at 15, enlisted into the Navy in 1961. On your 77th combat mission in Vietnam, you got shot down over enemy territory. You spent 2,516 days, almost 7 years as a POW. You were awarded 2 Silver Stars. After your release in 1973 during the Operation Homecoming, you returned to active duty in the Middle East during the Iranian hostage crisis, and your service ended with you becoming a weapons system test pilot at Point Mugu, and later retired in 1985 to the beautiful sunny Florida. Did I get everything right there?
Well, pretty close.
Pretty close?
Actually, I started flying at 15. I didn't get my license till the legal age, of course, but
okay.
I started flight lessons at 15.
I think you're past the statute of limitations now, so you can say you're so up in Ohio.
From the time I was 6 years old, airplanes fascinated me. And even in my high school yearbook, my statement was that I wanted to be a pilot, particularly potentially a military pilot.
Okay.
So, and we can go from there.
Yeah. So you wanted to be a pilot. What were you watching? What were you seeing that wanted you to be that made you want to be a pilot? Was it crop dusters or?
Well, no. You know, this back in the 40s. My dad came home from World War II. And he brought me a bunch of little plastic model airplanes, etc. And I always just loved it. If, you know the old story, if you hear an airplane flying overhead, you go out and look up. And my dad was in construction work, as I later became, but he had a buddy that had a J3 Cub, like the one here next door.
Yep.
And I got a ride about the age of 8 or 9, and that was my thing from there on.
So I guess the story has to go back to your dad. Your dad was in World War II. Well, where was he at? Where was he positioned?
Well, my dad was drafted late because he had 3 children, etc., etc., and so he didn't. He was drafted in the Army in 1944.
Okay.
So
right at the tail end.
Had right toward the end of the war. But I had, 3 uncles involved in World War II. One was a tank driver in Germany, and on and on. So, well, almost all younger people at that point in time were involved in the military or some military industry, etc.
Mostly the European theater then at that time?
Well, yes, at that time.
Yeah. I guess towards the end it was mostly...
Well, there was a lot going on in the Pacific, obviously, against the Japanese, but all of my relatives were in Europe or
interesting.
Potentially in Europe.
It's always interesting to the split, you know, because I mean we're fighting 2 completely different wars.
It just happened that way. My dad and my uncles were in the Army, so they were there primarily. The Pacific was primarily Navy and Marines, and and Army too. But
interesting. And then they were Army, and then you decided to enlist as
I enlisted in the Navy. I always laughed. All the history of my entire family back to the Civil War was Army. I wasn't that fond of mud, so I decided the Navy, with the potential of flying. I actually had been accepted by the Air Force prior to joining the Navy. I had taken all the written tests and the physical and all that, so I was potentially going to go in the Air Force, but at that point in time they were getting rid of pilots rather than. So they kept delaying my entry date, so I finally just said, well, I'm going to give the Navy a shot. So I really wanted to be a Navy pilot. I enlisted in the Navy, went to boot camp in San Diego, California at the time, 1961, and I had already passed the physicals and everything, but during my time in boot camp, you're in one big room, 60 guys. Everybody in my company had a cold, so I had a cold, and I told my lieutenant that was in charge of the company that I didn't think I could go over and pass the physical, and he said, well, you're scheduled, you got to do it, which I blew the hearing test, the audiometer test, so I knew So I was going to be in the Navy for a while.
Yeah.
And I had to wait a year to retake the physical test. So
Yep.
I graduated from boot camp as an honor, with honors, and went to jet engine mechanic school in Memphis, Tennessee, and graduated there #1 in my class. And
Oh, wow.
so I selected Key West as my my
Not
base.
a bad choice.
Just, well, you know, it was from all the stories I'd heard, it was a more exotic place and a romantic place and all
Yep.
that kind of stuff.
So from San Diego to Memphis to Key West.
And I was toward the tail end of I was there as a jet engine mechanic. That was my specialty. And long before your time, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis right at the end of 1962. And I had taken the test. I had waited a year, took the test again, passed it with flying colors. So I was selected for flight training, Navy pilot training. But then the Korean War, or the Cuban Missile Crisis came up, and we were out fueling airplanes all night long, and the guys they pulled everybody out of the maintenance shops, and we were standing guard, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, so it was like a long period of time of you
It was
being
at
on
that
call.
point. Well, Key West was kind of a sleepy place at that point in time, but everybody in the world showed up. The Air Force and the Marines were dug in on the beach, and the Army guys, and we had all kinds of, probably hundreds of airplanes on the base. So
Now, from your story in this, it seems like you constantly found yourself in the midst of
something.
Every time you were stationed somewhere,
Well,
there was
I guess
live
it's
action.
Just circumstance. They'd pull us out. We'd be refueling airplanes at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're all painted black, and
Yeah.
they'd just pull out, hot refuel them, and off they go doing their thing.
And all this, Vietnam was actively happening.
Vietnam was just really, it wasn't even on the horizon yet, but we had some people in Vietnam, advisors.
Okay.
That's a very small number at that point in time. And anyway, so I had a starting date, the end of 1962, actually in November. Yeah, November. And it was kind of a funny story. The head guy, the head maintenance guy on the base was a warrant officer. We called his nickname was Big Red, and he was about 6'4", red hair, had gold hash marks all the way up to his shoulder. And I had checked in with him when I first went to the base, and he said, "Well, you're not going to be here long," because he'd looked through my records, and so
He knew
anyway,
you were overqualified to be there?
well,
Or-
I had, not bragging, but I had scored a perfect score on all my tests joining the Navy.
Yeah.
And so they knew they tried to talk me into going to electronic school when I graduated from boot camp, and I said, no, I don't want to do that, because I wanted to be available to go to flight training.
Yep.
And electronic school was 2 years long or something like that.
Yeah, so it was going to force you into a
Yeah.
box.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I stayed out of the box.
That was smart, because you wanted to fly.
Yeah. Well, I had just made third-class petty officer in the Navy, which is E3, A4, E5, E5 actually.
Okay.
And so anyway, long story short, so they said, well, we're not sure we can let you go with the Cuban Missile Crisis going and all that. And I went up to see Big Red. They had Warrant Officer 4 was what his rank was. And he turned to his clerk there and said, well, damn it, if we can't let him go, we might as well make him an admiral. He said, good luck, son. Get out of here.
So it was either, they were trying to make you an admiral so you were a permanent fixture.
It was just a joke. But
Yeah.
It was his way of saying, if we need to have him to win the war, well, anyway.
Okay, that makes sense. That's
long
funny.
story short, I wound up having to hitchhike to Pensacola, Florida to start flight training because, and even with my pay grade or whatever, I was making like $78 a month pay. So
Wow.
that even in those days, didn't go very far.
Yeah, wow. I'm sure it was well spent in Key West.
So anyway, I managed to hitchhike. I went up to Pensacola, checked in, went through the the pre-flight, they call it up there, the indoctrination phase, which is 16 weeks long. Having already been in the Navy, it helped me a lot as far as being able to adapt to life, because the rest of the guys that we had were either coming out of the academy or coming out of AOTC or AOC school, which was aviation officer candidates. So anyway, I graduated well in boot camp, or in the indoctrination
in
program.
Pensacola?
Pensacola.
Okay, so then you graduated high in the class again.
Yeah, in mathematics, etc. Because before I had gone in the Navy, I had 2 years of aeronautical engineering.
Oh, okay.
So I had already had a lot of tough math and other courses of science, etc. So
it's interesting. So all of this stuff, I mean, you seem like you just have a knack for understanding the aviation and the mathematics behind it.
Yeah, I did.
It just all kind of flowed naturally to you.
It did. That's why I scored so high on all of my tests, I guess. But
it must have been tough though, because you're being pulled in such a direction of, like, you know, you could be working on the planes in a nice safe area, but you wanted to fly.
Yes.
But you had such a career ahead of you of just wrenching, basically.
Well, I did, but you know, flying was my thing.
Yeah.
Particularly flying off aircraft carriers. Which
well, and
was
you were probably
my career.
seeing all the new stuff.
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a jet pilot, all the rest of it, etc. So anyway, long story short, the first phases of it is at Softly Field. You fly the T-34, get about 30 hours in that, and at the end of that, they decide where you stand in the group, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to the people that are graduating that week. Whether you're going to go to jet training, if you want to, go to propeller training, which part of that turns out later to be helicopter training. I wanted to be a jet pilot. I graduated, I think, third in my group, or second, whatever it was. Anyway, I qualified for jet training, went to basic jet training in Meridian, Mississippi.
Okay.
Flying the T-2 Buckeye.
Oh, interesting.
So this is my first taste of jet flying, and of course they give you all the equipment, the torso harness and the G-suits and all that good stuff. So just as a sidelight, I did run into John McCain up there. He was one of the flight instructors there. He wasn't my flight instructor, but I knew him casually.
That's interesting. I was actually going to ask you about him
later on. Well, I will talk more about it later on.
Of course.
Yeah, my flight instructor was a guy by the name of Mad Dog Woods.
Mad Dog Woods.
He was quite a character, a little short guy, bald hair, but he was a good instructor. So anyway, one of the things that happened during a period of time I was there about 6 months for basic jet training, was that John F. Kennedy was assassinated during that period of time.
Yeah.
And that was quite a stir for the country, of course.
I can only imagine what it felt for a military
Yes,
base.
it did. Actually, I was out flying when it happened, and I came back and landed and walked into what we call the maintenance area. You know, we have to sign all the logbooks, etc., etc. And they said the president's been shot. I said, you know, BS. No, we're serious. And I went up to the ready room, and the TV was on, and of course that all that happened. But
yeah,
that was quite a shock for everybody.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I was a 9/11 kid.
Yeah.
So it's the similar level of
shock.
like,
Big. What's going on? You know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went from there. I graduated from there. I went on to advanced jet training in Kingsville, Texas, where I flew a whole bunch of different jets: the F-9F Panther, the Cougar, and the F-11 Tiger, which was a supersonic airplane, etc. So by the time I finished there, I had about 300 and some hours of flight time, which is a lot of flight time for graduating from flight training. Like everybody had basically the same. And there are some interesting stories happened there, but we'll skip that for the time being. That's for another day.
What level of interesting do you mean, I guess?
Well, I'll tell you the story as quickly as I can. My last phase of flight training was in the F-11F Tiger, which is a supersonic airplane. It's a very fast airplane. The airspeed to land the airplane on final approach is 180 knots, so you can tell it was
sporty.
Pretty hot.
Yeah.
Anyway, when we were doing a phase called high altitude air-to-air gunnery. and which you shoot at in this case, a banner that's being towed by another airplane.
Okay.
So, any long story short, I was up on a perch. We call the perch when the airplane is pulling the banners down here and the banners here. Now you roll in, you do a big S curve, and you're pulling 4 Gs in that turn.
Wow.
And you roll wings level and fire at the banner. Well, just as I did that, I'm just ready to fire. The banner had broken loose from the cable and was coming right in my face. Well, without it, you don't even have time to think. So automatically I just slammed the airplane inverted and pulled down on it, and pulled about 10.3 Gs, so I blacked out. When you black out, all of a sudden everything looks like you're looking through the end of a BB gun, and then I was unconscious.
In a dive?
In a dive.
At what altitude?
I rolled in at 20,000 feet.
Okay.
And I finally woke up just as I heard my flight instructor, who was in a different airplane, of course, we're all single-seaters, pull out, pull out, pull out. And I finally woke up. I'm inverted, which means upside down, about 70 degrees nose down, still in afterburner, because you go into that turn in afterburner.
So you're full speed?
I'm full speed, yeah.
At the ground.
And I rolled the wings, I popped the speed brakes, pulled the throttle to idle. Didn't want to pull the nose up too fast because I'm probably going 800 miles an hour or more, headed down, and I pull up and I finally get the airplane out of the bottom of the loop at about 2,500 feet, 3,000 feet.
Whew, my heart was racing hearing that. I can't imagine.
And the flight instructor calls me and says, "How many Gs did you pull?" And I look, we have a G meter in the front. 10.3 Gs, sir.
How old were you at this time?
I was 21, I think.
Oh my God.
He said, "Take it back to the base and land it very gently," which I did.
Yeah,
anyway,
the assumption was some damage was probably done to the plane.
Because the G limit on the airplane is like 12 Gs or something like that. So I don't know. But anyway, it was an interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that that earned you a little respect around, because you didn't do it on purpose. You had to.
No, it just, I blacked out. I mean, I pulled 10 point. You normally with the G suit, etc., you can stand pull about 6 Gs before you really start to lose it. And I pulled 10.3, so that's way over the limit.
Yeah. So you were out there, you got your 350 hours, you graduated from flight school.
Yeah. During our flight training, even during the basic jet training, we do what we call carrier qualifications, where we land for the first time on an aircraft carrier.
Okay, so an actual aircraft carrier, not just like this is the size.
A real aircraft carrier.
Okay.
Well, we do a lot of practice on a runway that's set up just like the aircraft carrier, with the lighting, etc. And you have what is called an LSO, or landing signal officer, out there, who's there to assist you. I later became one later on in my career, but anyway, and so you do a lot of practice before you go out there. But we carrier qualified in Pensacola. I had flown down from Meridian. We practiced there, and then carrier qualified on the old Lexington at that point.
Lexington. I was going to ask what carrier it was, because there was quite a few.
Yeah, this was an old World War II carrier that had been converted to an angled deck carrier.
Were they using a tether at the time or anything, or to hook the planes, or was it just?
Oh yeah, we had tail hook. We had the whole thing that you normally have on an aircraft carrier.
I didn't know if that was more of like a later thing that was implemented for some of the faster planes.
No, it was the same thing. But anyway, so you had already had an aircraft carrier, and we had to practice air-to-air gunnery and formation flying and fighter tactics and all that rest of it. When you graduate from flight training, you're ready to be assigned to a squadron, combat squadron, ready to go fight if necessary.
And at that point, did you feel you were going to be going to fight? Was that necessary yet? Still not necessary?
Not at that point in time.
Okay,
this was, I graduated in 1964 from flight training.
Okay, so it was still not...
18 months, roughly 18 months, 2 years to go through flight training. So anyway, but before you go to your squadron, you go to what is called a replacement air group, where you are fly the airplane that you're going to be assigned to a squadron that flies that particular airplane. So
Yep.
you fly that one. We carried qual and that in Oceana, Virginia, which is Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Okay. Wait, you went to all the major bases.
Well, yeah.
Pensacola, Virginia, San Diego.
Anyway, so I went through the what we call, it's called a RAG, but it's the Replacement Air Group. It's its proper name. In the A4 Skyhawk, which was a single seat, single engine attack aircraft, fighter air attack.
Okay.
And then I was later assigned, when I graduated from there, again after carrier qualing with that airplane, carrier qualifications with that airplane, I was assigned to my first squadron in the VA, which is Attack Squadron 76. And the squadron was in the air wing, which is attached to the brand new carrier, the USS America.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
So once I was assigned, fairly shortly after I was assigned, we deployed. That means we went to sea to the Caribbean to do what is called workups, which is about 3 months of operating the carrier to full speed, to as if in wartime, in the air wings, et cetera, et cetera. And we did a tremendous amount of flying during that period of time.
Okay, so you
So
guys
that was
were
3 months.
practicing.
Yeah, we were getting ready for war.
Yeah.
Yeah, honing our skills, so to speak.
Makes sense.
And I got a lot of landings, et cetera, in the A4. Right after we had come back from that particular, what we called a cruise or a deployment, another story, just to give you.
Yeah.
We would normally fly the aircraft off the carrier about 100 miles at sea or so, to our normal bases, whatever they may be. The fighters went to their base, and we went to Virginia Beach. We had one airplane on board the carrier that we didn't fly off. And the reason we didn't fly it off was in the last month or two, we'd had several problems with the airplane in that every time we flew it, we were getting unsafe landing gear indications that the landing gear wasn't down and locked. And finally, the captain of the ship told us to put that SOB airplane down on the hangar deck and leave it there till we end the cruise. So then we flew in, and I think it was over the weekend, which the carrier came in and offloaded all the stuff. We had one airplane left on board, and I was a junior officer, so you're low man on the totem pole. Any dirty jobs, you get them.
Yep.
And my squadron commander said, "Brad, go over and fly that get that airplane and fly it off the carrier and bring it back over to Oceana," which is only about 20, 30 miles at the most, but the carrier is tied up to the pier. So it isn't at sea making its normal 30 knots of headwind to give you 30 knots less on the catapult shot. Plus it's got a buddy store, which is a fuel tank, which we would use to refuel other aircraft. And it's supposed to be empty of fuel, which it carries 3,000 pounds of fuel in that buddy store. I get to the carrier, got all my flight gear. I'm pre-flighting the airplane on the hangar deck, and I realize the buddy store is full of fuel. So that's an extra 3,000 pounds, which the carrier is tied up to the pier, not at sea.
Yeah.
So the catapult shot is going to be a shot and a half, a real shot.
So the fuel, it being on it, was that pushing the nose of the carrier down? Is that what
it's just your extra weight, which you would normally not have. So when you shot off a catapult at sea, you got 30 knots of headwind.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to reach 150 knots to fly, that adds that 30 knots to it. So your catapult shot is a little bit softer, okay? Quite a bit softer.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went through what we call an ATOPS, which is an operations manual, etc., and it's got all the numbers in it. And I'm right borderline of being able to fly this airplane at all. And so I called back to the squadron and talked to our NATOPS officer, who's in charge of all these books and the operations. And I called him and I said, "Run the numbers for me, please, and let me know if I can fly this airplane." he did. He said, yeah, you can, but you're going to have to use half flaps, which is normally, we normally use full flaps for takeoff, which gives us more lift. Anyway. So I said, okay, well, they brought the airplane up, and I'm sitting right in front of the island, crossways across the deck. There's nobody else on the ship. All the other airplanes are gone and everything. And they have a catapult crew there. And I plug in my oxygen mask, which has your oxygen and all of your connections for your headset, for your helmet. And sure as hell, my audio was not working. So I think, and the captain's up there and is on the bridge, and he calls down and said, "What the hell's going on? I want that damn airplane off my carrier." So I get a note. His Marine adjutant aide brings me down a note with his helmet and said, "Use my helmet. I want it back this afternoon." So I took his helmet, put it on, everything worked. Anyway, they catapult me off. They pull me up on the catapult. I go to full power, check everything. That's what you do. Salute. I'm ready to go. And it was a shot and a half because I'm half flaps, I'm overweight, etc. And the carrier is tied up at the pier. Mm-hmm. And the city is right ahead of me.
You're just looking right at this.
I'm looking at the city.
Oh, okay.
Well, they shot me off in the airplane. Ooh, just kind of settled. I finally climbed out, went back, called Oceana. And I had to shoot an instrument approach to get into Oceana because there's low clouds. So I call them up, get an approach all set up, and I start the approach down and throw the gear handle down, and same old problem, unsafe gear indications. So
it was a cursed plane.
It's a cursed airplane, and anyway, so I called the squadron on a different frequency, and I said, "Would you put an LSO out at the intersection of the runways, give me a positive gear down lock indication so I can land this airplane," which they did. So anyway, I break out of the clouds about 250, 300 feet, whatever it is, stay at low, and I fly right over the runway at the intersection, and the LSO said, "You got 3 good gear, keep it down, bring it around and land it," which I did. No problem, but it was to my knowledge, and I've flown in the Navy for 24 years, I was the only guy that ever was shot off a carrier tied to the pier, one, and all the other circumstances involved in it too. So anyway.
A lot of people wouldn't realize that tied to the pier is such an Achilles heel to that.
Yeah, it's a total detriment because normally you have 30 knots of headwind.
But even a parked boat, a parked ship out, can't really launch the same way. No. That same, thought process. It's like sitting there.
The thing is, you don't have that airspeed, so you're going to drop down. You normally have around 150 knots airspeed or more on a catapult launch anyway. It's a 2-second shot. You go from 0 to flying speed in 2 seconds. So, 300 feet.
Something small and easier, That plane in particular needed all the runway and some more.
It needed a little bit more.
How close do you think you got to the water when you came off?
Maybe 50 feet. The carrier deck is 90 feet over the water, and it's settled, so I don't know. I wasn't looking at the water.
Just hoping at that point.
Whoa.
How much more you can do? You're pulling back, and
you're full power, and you got a little nose up. And what else are you going to do? I don't know.
Okay, so then at that point, you're probably thinking deployment's coming.
Actually, I wasn't.
No.
At that point in time. During my time in the RAG, I had a weekend, a buddy and I had driven up to Washington, D.C. just for the weekend, just for kicks. And he and I stayed we checked into a hotel up there, and I had stopped in the bar at the hotel, and I was sitting there having a drink at the bar, and I got to talking to this guy. And he was in uniform. He was an Army Green Beret. He had just come back from Vietnam. And he said, and I started asking him questions about, because we knew Vietnam was coming by now.
Yeah.
But we weren't. We had no orders to go. But anyway, I said, "Well, how are things going?" He said, "Well, it's like this. And at that point in time, we only had, quote, advisors over there trying to teach the Vietnamese. He said, no offense, these guys are rice farmers. They've never worn a pair of boots in their life, never had a rifle, etc. And he said, and you know, they know they're rice farmers, and whoever wins this war, they're still going to be rice farmers. And you're trying to teach them how to be a soldier, etc. He said, it doesn't look good. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I'm back. We'll go back. Go jump ahead. I'm in VA 76. I'm aboard the aircraft carrier America. We go out, do our 3 months. I fly the airplane off the carrier. I take 2 weeks of leave. No cell phones back in those days. You didn't have any of that stuff. So anyway, I had a girlfriend up in New Hampshire, or up in Rhode Island. So I met her. We spent a couple of weeks up in Maine and World's Fair and all that other kind of stuff. So I get back to Oceana. My squadron's gone. They've disappeared.
Just the boat's gone?
The boat's still there, but the airplane, but the squadron isn't. So I went over. We have what it called a military liaison. I said, well, I'm assigned to VA 76. Where are they? Well, they're now on the Enterprise, and they're down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Get your butt on an airplane and get down there. So the next morning, I'm on a DC-6, which is a 4-engine pop job, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I had been out with some of my friends from Virginia Beach that evening celebrating, and I obviously was a little bit hungover, and the entire flight is wives and children going down to Guantanamo Bay to be with their husbands.
Interesting.
It was a long flight and not a very pleasant one. But anyway, I landed in Guantanamo Beach, went over to the Enterprise. I figured I might be in some trouble since the ship's moving. And the quarter says, no big deal. You know, Brad, welcome back. And went on from there.
Wow.
So we spent another 3 months working up, doing workups on the Enterprise. So I flew an awful lot, got a lot of landings, did a lot of combat work. The one thing I will jump back to talk about in those days, in 1964 or 5, it was 65 by now. 70% of all of our training was for nuclear delivery. We carried nuclear weapons, and we did a lot of practice on nuclear weapons delivery. That was our primary mission.
Like you were going to deliver them with aircraft?
Yes.
Okay, so
we did a lot of what they call low altitude flights, all the way from Virginia down to Florida, down at 300 feet.
Interesting.
As fast as we could go, etc., etc. And we did exercises on board the carrier. The first 2 weeks you went to sea, you spent all your time in the Combat Information Center planning your nuclear mission, whether it's somewhere in Russia. So you usually had 2 missions. One was the east. If you were in the Pacific, you had this on the east side of Russia. And if you were in the Mediterranean, your target would be in western Russia.
So at that point, did you feel that if there was going to be a nuclear bomb dropped, you were going to be potentially the guy?
I was going to be the guy that did it.
Yeah.
That was our mission.
That's a very heavy...
It's a heavy mission. I had gone to some of the top secret schools for this and that, and we actually practiced on board the carrier. The weapon would come up from the weapon storage. We'd have to inspect and accept the weapon as the pilot.
Yeah.
It would then be moved to the aircraft carrier, which was cordoned off with usually 6 Marines with loaded guns, and it wasn't playtime.
Yeah.
This was serious stuff.
Well, so you're being trained to drop the bomb while there's bombs being tested off the coast in like Bikini Atoll, at kind of the same time there. So
they're continuing to develop. Anyway, that was our primary mission. We did some conventional weapons work as well, but 70% of our training was nuclear weapons.
Wow. That's pretty
At that point
unreal.
in time, see, this was before they had the nuclear submarines.
Yep.
That later on picked up that mission, the boomers. So we were the primary guys that were going to be delivering nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Obviously the Air Force as well, but we were the point.
Wow.
So in thinking realistically, even we knew when we planned these missions, because we had to plan a mission with all the checkpoints on the ground and all the rest of it, the weather, the chances of survival if you had to eject from the aircraft, on and on and on. As I said, it took 2 full weeks of 8 hours a day planning, and then your plan had to be accepted by a board of senior officers.
And I guess at that point you were thinking Moscow,
Yeah.
Russia, St. Petersburg.
Well, I can't divulge the targets,
Of course,
but
of course.
they were serious targets.
I think at this point, yeah, that would be the assumption.
So anyway, it was serious business. So you always had that in the back of your mind, and then you would practice. You would get in the aircraft, start the aircraft. Weapons had already been loaded, etc. So you had to go through your checklist, etc., and get ready to start the aircraft or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's another story. But so we did 3 months work up on the Enterprise. Now went back to Virginia Beach, and now we knew we got our orders, so we're going to go to Southeast Asia for the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
So we left in October 1965, sailed around Africa. We had an all-nuclear task force, so we didn't stop anywhere, which you would normally stop several places. And we left Norfolk, Virginia, arrived off the coast of South Vietnam.
Was this potentially one of those missions or one of those deployments that only people that knew? Because you hear about those sometimes.
As far as the ship, they knew the ship was leaving, but that's about as far as it went.
Yeah, kind of one of those.
You're going to Southeast Asia.
Compartmentalized.
So we arrived off the coast of South Vietnam in late November we left in late October. We arrived in November before Thanksgiving. Started flying close air support missions in South Vietnam, using napalm, guns, whatever weapons were needed to support the Marines and the Army guys out in the jungles if they got into a firefight with the Viet Cong or the VC from North Vietnam, etc.
Yeah.
So most of our workups early on were South Vietnam. The way it was set up at that point in time, we had 2 carriers at that point in time. One was in the off the coast of South Vietnam, and one was off of North Vietnam.
Hi, we're just filming.
We're filming. Hi, Henrik.
Filming?
Good
Yes.
to see you.
For whom?
For him.
I'm Hendrik.
I'm hearing his stories of war and everything.
Am I interrupting you? Sorry.
Yeah, he's just in the middle of a story. You can listen in if you'd like.
Pull up a chair.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Anyway, so we were off the coast of South Vietnam. We started flying missions, etc. Then you had a carrier off the coast of South Vietnam doing close air support for South Vietnam. You had a carrier off the North Vietnam. We were normally about 100 miles at sea, 150 miles at sea. And they're flying hard target missions into North Vietnam. And then after a month or so, you would swap carriers.
Okay.
And then you would fly missions into North Vietnam.
The carriers would swap, or you would swap to a different carrier?
The carrier would swap.
The actual carriers.
So we would
swap.
normally be at sea for 30 days at a time, and then we'd go back to the Philippines to Subic Bay, have 10 days or so, and then back out to the carrier.
And from my notes, you flew 77
missions
over Vietnam, and those missions were dropping napalm, like you were saying. And
well, in the South, it was napalm and cluster weapons, et cetera, because we were doing close air support to try to support our Marines and our Army guys if they were being overrun.
What were you flying at the time?
A4 Skyhawk.
A4. Was that I don't know my Vietnam airplanes all that well. Is that like
it's a picture of one?
There you go. So were you solo flying in this?
Yes.
Okay,
it's
just
single
one-seater.
Single-seat airplane.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you were just whatever they hooked to the bottom of it, and they.
Yeah, we would normally carry a load of napalm, CBUs, or regular bombs, and then we would fly inland and hook up with what they called a forward air observer, or FAC, forward air controller.
Yep.
He would designate the target with a smoke rocket, drop your weapons
Yeah.
here, okay? And because, you know, you're flying over the jungle, you can't see what's happening down below, et cetera, et cetera.
You just see a little
this
smoke.
Yeah. Drop your weapons north of this, from his smoke forward or north or whichever. So we did a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we on 77 missions, but I flew some missions. We flew a lot of missions up in the north. I got shot at a lot of times. Shot up a couple of times. It's before I got shot down.
What were they shooting at you then? Was it just...
The anti-aircraft, the SAM surface-to-air missiles.
Were they decently successful with them, or were they pretty kind of just sporadically shooting and hoping?
They got better as time went on. He actually, around the city of Hanoi, was more heavily defended than Moscow or Washington, D.C., or whatever you want to call it.
Interesting.
So the Navy lost over 300 A4s in Vietnam.
Wow. They were pretty successful then, I would say, with
In the long
getting
haul,
them down
they were.
after a long enough period of time.
Well, I'm going to tell you one story. It was probably the most, how would I put it, exciting flight I had prior to being shot down. And at that point in time, of course, we didn't have the weapons we have today, where we have standoff weapons, laser-guided weapons, and all that type of stuff. So you had to go fly right to the target, fly over the target, and usually sometimes at very low altitude, and drop your bombs, rockets, whatever it may be you're going to drop. So if we were going after a very important target, heavily defended target, we had what we called alpha strikes. That is, you put as many airplanes on target as you possibly can. So this is in December now of 1965, just before Christmas. I think it was the 21st or 22nd of December, something like that. We had an alpha strike on a power plant, which we'll call Wong Bi, which is a coal-fired fire plant in North Vietnam, northeast of their main port city, which supplied electrical power for a big portion of northeast Vietnam.
Very important target to get down.
Important target. So we had an alpha strike. We had two carriers in the north by now. It was our carrier, the Enterprise, and we had the carrier, the Ranger. That means that we're going to put as many aircraft in the air over the target as possible.
It's a lot of aircraft.
So we're going to have 80 aircraft over the target, and we're going to go in off the two ships. We're going to join up. The way it was set up, flights of 4, okay, which is a standard in the Navy. A division of aircraft is called a division. You have the flight leader and his wingman. Then you have a section leader and his wingman. And that's the way we would go into the strike. And so every other flight, one would go in from 10,000 feet, do what was called dive bombing. They're coming down at a 45-degree angle or 30-degree angle and release their weapons around 4,000 feet and pull out and go on home. The other type would do a low altitude release, which with a bomb we called the snake eye. And on the snake eyes, at the rear of the bomb, you had fins that were attached to the bomb, and they were closed until you dropped them, and then they would pop out like this, so the weapon would drop basically straight down.
Okay.
And we would drop those at 300 feet.
That one sounds pretty difficult to drop onto the target, no?
No, it wasn't that hard to drop, but you're at 300 feet, and they're shooting at you.
Okay.
And there's a lot more guys can hit you at 300 feet than they can at 10,000.
You can almost look someone in the eyes at 300 feet.
So long story short, as I say. But anyway, we're in there. We're going in. Our flight, our division, is about halfway in this whole gaggle of 80 airplanes. So we're somewhere in the middle, and we're the ones who, our four are going to drop low-altitude bombs at 300 feet, snake eyes. So, as in the latest Tom Cruise movie, the one what is called
the Top Gun.
Yeah. Top Gun, whatever. They're flying up the valley.
Yep.
That's how we're going to go. We go up. We hit the coast of North Vietnam. The target's over here. Hit the coast of North Vietnam. We turn west, fly down the valley, climb up over the mountain, and roll in on the target right here, which is about 8-10 miles south of the mountains.
Is this line of sight flight the whole time?
No.
Instruments?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's all.
Yeah,
It's
sorry,
all
I don't know
line of
the-
sight VFR.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm flying number 4 into flight, so I'm back here. We got the flight leader, his wingman, section leader, and then myself. So anyway, we are flying down this valley, and it's kind of like the Tom Cruise movie, Flying Down the Valley. I don't know if you remember the first part of the movie where they're jigging down the valley. Yep. And the reason you do that is to stay below the radar thing, the radar scan. And so we're flying down the valley. The only difference, we didn't have the girls and the music that Tom Cruise had, but same type of flying. We're flying down the valley. We're about halfway to the target, 3/4 of the way to the target. And I notice I must have taken a hit because I have, in my cockpit, I have an indication of a utility hydraulic failure. That means it probably have a ruptured line somewhere. So I called the flight leader and I said, you got a utility hydraulic failure. You got 2 choices, either return back by yourself or continue on. And the utility hydraulic failure, it's a backup system. So, you know, I'm going to continue on to the target. I'm already halfway there. I'm not turning back now.
And by yourself, I mean, there's a lot of risk.
You don't want to be by yourself.
Yeah.
So anyway, we approach our pull-up, and normally what you do is you pull up and you roll at the same time so that you come over the mountain upside down, inverted. So you have much more control of that pitch. You roll over upside down. We start our pull-up, and I'm flying wing on my section leader. And we start to turn, and all of a sudden he falls behind me. He falls down under, I can't see him. And I roll up inverted like this, and I'm watching him go that way. And his name was Jack Prudhomme. We called him Prudy, and I knew Jack real well because it's a small group. You got 15, 16 pilots in a squadron. You get to know everybody. Mm-hmm. You party with them. You know their families. I knew Jack's wife. I met her, and he had 2 little girls at the time. And I'm rolling up, and the target is there. And as I'm watching Jack to see what the hell's going on, and he's headed right straight for this mountain. And I watch long enough to see if he ejects, if the canopy comes off and he ejects. No, he doesn't. He flies right into the mountain. The airplane explodes. It's full of fuel and, you know, all of our bombs. 3,000 pounds of bombs, just a big fireball. You know, it's like one of those moments in life that you'll remember forever. You know, it's just seared in your mind. But you know, here you are in combat. You can't stop and think about it or anything else. You just press on to the target.
You can't go back for him. You can't do anything.
No.
You just gotta.
And so I roll over to the mountain. The flight leader and his wingman are here. We had planned on going in as 2 sections, so we have separate targets. Everybody had a specific target they were supposed to hit. Mine was at the base of a big tall smokestack. Well, by this time we're about 40th into the target, and it's fire and smoke, and
no
you can
smokestack
hardly
anymore.
make out the target, you know, and stuff exploding and billowing black smoke. Well, I pick out my target. Now I'm by myself because the flight leader and his guy are over there. And I get to my target, get 300 feet, flying through the smoke and fire and all that, and I pickle off my weapons, and just after I do that, I get hit in the left wing and the airplane almost flips over. And, you know, up to 300 feet, I recover the airplane, get hit in the other wing, and it goes the other way. I bring it back again, and then all of a sudden the nose just disappears. The nose of the airplane, just like somebody took a machete, just
blown clean
that
off.
Far in front of the windscreen, it just disappeared. Got blown off. That's the radar and all of that stuff just disappeared. Well, flying an airplane like that is like flying a 55-gallon drum. They don't fly well.
Yeah.
So my plan was to drop down from the target, even lower than 300 feet, down to 50 feet or 100 feet, and there was a long water estuary out to the bay, out to the Gulf of Tonkin. And I'm flying out this bay, right down at 50, 100 feet, whatever, and they're shooting down at me from the hills on the way out there.
down at
down, because I'm down.
Yeah,
on the
they
water.
have high
And
ground
they
on
got
you.
high ground on both sides, and anyway, so I'm trying to jink a little bit as I'm going out there, and I finally get clear of the estuary, and I'm out over the water, and I start climbing. I climb back up to 20,000 feet and start heading for the aircraft carrier. And I know the airplane's all shot up because both wings are leaking fuel. The nose is gone. It's hard to fly. And all of a sudden, an F4, who we normally had for rescue cap or fighter cap, comes down and joins on my right wing. So I'm headed to the carrier, and he's sitting on the right wing, and then he disappears, goes underneath me. Well, this is comes up on the left side. This is standard procedure if you're looking for damage on another aircraft. You look underneath, you move to the left side, and he comes back over to the right side and joins up again. And he doesn't say a word, he just he just shakes his head. I'm thinking, oh, that bad, huh?
I mean, it sounds heavily damaged.
Oh, it was heavily damaged, all right. So anyway, the radio still works, the engine's still running, it's still flying, not good, but flying. And I'm headed toward the aircraft carrier.
And you took it back up to 20,000 feet.
Yeah.
You felt comfortable doing that.
Well, in a jet, you have to be at high altitude to get any range because you burn so much fuel at low altitude. That's why your jetliners fly at 39,000. Okay. So I'm about 50 miles from the ship, and I call the ship. Climax was their call sign. Climax, Sunglass 503. I'm 50 miles north, heavy battle damage. I need a ready deck. That means get everything out of the way. I got one pass at this, and I want to land. So they said, Roger, keep it coming. We'll have a ready deck for you. So I get within about 15 miles, and it's time to now see either fish or cut bait. So I put the gear handle down in the hopes that the gear aren't damaged. So I put the gear down, and everything works. So I managed to land the airplane on the carrier. It was actually a pretty good landing for a beat-up airplane. And I remember today, so when you land, you get out of the cable and they taxi you forward. And so I'm taxiing, and we have our guys that are on the flight deck that are there for the maintenance and for tie the aircraft down. And they're just standing there and they're just going, mouth open, looking at this piece of trash that just landed.
Yeah, probably smoking and leaking
It
fuel.
was leaking all over the place.
All the fluids.
Hydraulic fluids.
Yeah. So what was that phrase you said? You either become bait or you cut fish or...
You cut fish or either fish or cut bait, one or the other.
Either fish or cut bait. All right.
So it's time. Anyway, so I got out of the airplane and, of course, had to report to my squadron commander and then the air wing commander and the captain of the ship that Jack Prudhomme had been killed on that flight.
What do you think happened to his plane?
It just exploded. I mean, there was nothing left.
I mean, like, what caused it, do you think, to go down?
In the turn, I think Jack either got hit with something. I didn't see anything, so I don't know. He got hit, either killed him, or so severely injured him he couldn't fly the airplane anymore. And it just fell off. I didn't see any smoke or anything. Yeah. It just fell off and headed right toward this mountain and hit the side of the mountain and blew up.
Wow.
So that was our first combat loss of the. Later on, throughout the period of time, we lost another guy, one of my roommates, and you wind up having to pack their gear and send it home. It's not a pleasant thing.
Yeah, that's...
So at that period of time of the war, we were losing about one every 6 guys.
Is there a door right? Oh, I didn't know how loud it was. That's fine. I don't think it's too loud.
You're losing about one every 6 guys, so...
One every 6 guys. Every 6...
Throughout the ship.
Like, full throughout the ship, not just pilots, but...
Well, I'm talking pilots.
Yeah, pilots,
air
okay.
crew.
Yeah. Yep. Because there's probably some bigger planes along with...
Yeah. Some of the fighters, they have 2 people on board,
yeah,
etc. Well, the jump forward on this, we're taking forever here. We're already an hour into it.
You're fine.
I was on my 77th mission, and normally when we were flying over the north, primarily over the north, we would fly 2 weeks of day flights, and then with the other carrier, they would fly 2 weeks a night, and then you'd swap. So a lot of our flights were at nighttime.
Oh, wow.
So But anyway, the day I was shot down, it was an early morning brief, like 5 in the morning, got some combat information, and it's kind of funny. Everything on the board the carrier is red lights at night because of your vision. They don't want to destroy your night vision.
Yeah.
So you can't tell colors at night. In the red light, you can't tell what the colors are. So I'm sitting in combat information, we're getting ready to take all my notes, and I look down, I got one white sock on and one brown one. I'm thinking, what the hell, you know? Just something crazy,
Yeah.
you know? Anyway, we're briefed for an early launch, first light, daylight, I mean even dawn, not even daylight. And our target is a SAM site in North Vietnam, surface-to-air missile site, in which we would go in and try to blow up these surface-to-air missile sites, because they were pretty dangerous. So anyway, we're on the way to target, and 4 guys, and again I'm tail end Charlie, because I'm a junior guy. I was a lieutenant junior grade at the time.
Yeah, you were still young at that point,
I was
right?
still
You were
young,
still in
very
your
young.
20s.
Yeah, yeah. And so anyway, we're on the way to the target, and the target is clogged in with fog or bad weather, whatever it is. So the flight leader selects another target, which was a bridge over a river in the southern part of North Vietnam, near the city of Vinh, south of the city of Vinh. You know, target's a target. And anyway, we're doing dive bombing that day. So I rolled in on the target, and just about the time I rolled in on the target, dropped the nose 45 degrees. Apparently, they blew off the tail of my airplane.
Didn't even know.
I didn't see it.
Yeah.
All I felt was I have no controls. I felt the bang, but I have my stick, I can't do much with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm already in a dive, and I'm steaming downhill, and the airplane is getting steeper and steeper. We're only about 5 miles inland, so I'm thinking if I can get the nose up, turn, at least get out over the water, and then eject, because this airplane's not going to fly very long, at least I might have a chance to be rescued. So that was my thought. Well, as I'm doing this, I want to get rid of all the weight, all the bombs and everything, so I got my hand up here. We have a bomb release handle, jettison, called a jettison handle, to get the weight off so I can try to use the trim to get the nose up so I can turn. So I had my hand up here. By this time, the airplane's about 70 degrees nose down and picking up speed like crazy. And I see out of the corner of my eye, I'm 600 miles an hour out of the corner of my eye over here. And I remember taking my hand off the bomb jettison handle and reaching for the ejection seat. And I am very low and very fast. And I remember reaching for the handle. From then on, I went out of the airplane. It either blew up or I ejected, one or the other. And I never got my eyes open. At 600 miles an hour, it's like hitting a brick wall. Tore my helmet off, my mask, everything else. I had a pistol, 38, strapped to my chest. It came up and cut me a gash in my throat.
600-mile-an-hour pistol hitting you in the face.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I felt a tug. You know, I was still semi-conscious, I guess. I felt a tug, didn't have my eyes open. And I land, and the first thing I know, I'm 10 feet underwater. I look up and I can see the water, the light filtering through the water. And I went through the procedure, Navy guys, we have to get rid of pull our May West in our flotation gear, get up to the top of service, get rid of the chute, because if the chute fills up with water, it'll drag you down and drown you. Got rid of that. So here I am, 7 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of about a mile-wide river in North Vietnam. And you can smell the charcoal smoke, because all out in the boonies, all they have is charcoal. That's how the fires, that's what they cook with. And the human fertilizer on the fields and dogs barking. And my flight had obviously tried to get, my radio was broken, my survival radio, I threw that away.
Yeah.
And they tried to look for me, but they couldn't find anything. They couldn't find the aircraft or me.
And you're saying it was bad weather, so you couldn't see really anything
well,
flying around?
Well, where we were at wasn't too bad, but I mean, anyway, they didn't see anything.
Yeah.
So here I am, and all of a sudden they put a boat out from the north side of the river and one from the south side of the river. and they're approaching me. By this time, I got rid of my 38 and all my ammunition and everything, because I knew I'm not going to fight my way out of North Vietnam with a 38. You know?
No.
They stopped about maybe 30 yards away from me, the boat. 6 guys in black pajamas, all with an AK-47s, and the guy standing up in the front of the boat looked like he'd already been in the war. His face was all scarred up, and etc. And I'm thinking, actually, I was probably in shock, because I wasn't terrified, I wasn't scared. It was just like, you know.
You were probably already surprised to be alive.
I was
from
surprised.
that.
It was a miracle to be alive to start with.
And you were just immediately thinking, oh, these people are pulling me out of the water.
I didn't think that. I was aware of who they were and
Yeah.
what their plans were. But it was just like, I had my hands up. They stopped, looked. They finally came over, grabbed me by the scruff of the neck, pulled me ashore. They took everything, my flight boots and everything except my flight suit. So I'm barefoot. They wire my arms behind my back, and they start marching me off to this village. And I'm blindfolded. And as we're marching along, it's probably my guys looking for me. Obviously they hear an airplane overhead, and nothing moves in the daytime in Vietnam. Everything that moves at night, because we're looking for them.
Yeah.
They pushed me down the side of the road there. And I'm sure they didn't know, but right there happened to be a pit about 4 or 5 feet deep with bamboo logs over the top, a kind of bomb shelter or whatever. And I'm looking down in there. I could see out the bottom of my blindfold, and there's a black snake curled up in the bottom of that hole. I'm thinking, I don't want to go down there. Yeah, I'm sure they didn't even know it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, the airplane went away. They grabbed me up, took me in the village. Well, they took me, I put me on display in there, tied up, etc., etc. And so all the villagers come around in there. So that night, they pulled me out, put me up on top of this mound, and had all the villagers gather around, and they were doing whatever. I don't know what they were doing their propaganda thing, popping up the war,
Yeah.
etc.
They treated you kind of like a trophy of the war.
At that point in time.
Yeah. You were a victory for them.
I think they got a bounty for if they kept us alive and turned us in, you know.
Okay.
I'm sure they got some reward for that. Because I had about 4 guards around me. I remember looking out, and then here comes this guy with a rice knife, like a big machete, coming, charging up the hill, and one of the guards just took the rifle butt and hit him in the head, and down he goes. Anyway, during the ejection, I had torn up my knee one of my knees because of the ejection. I don't know, flailing. So my knee was about the size of a small cantaloupe by that time.
Oh, wow.
And all the muscles in my neck were torn, stretched, whatever they were. I couldn't hold my head up straight without physically moving it.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, long story short, they had me up there. They're running away with me. And then they're going to move me in. From the pain of my knee or whatever it was, I passed out, rolled down this hill. They grabbed me when we started off through. It took a week from there on through North Vietnam. They don't travel at night, as I said, either in the back of a truck, on a boat, across the river. But they would march me through these villages and throw rocks at me and clubs and beat on me and whatever it may be.
And were you barefoot at this point
I was
still?
barefoot.
You were barefoot in your flight suit for a week?
Yeah.
Tied up?
Yeah.
Were you blindfolded still, or were
blindfolded,
they tied?
I could only see down, And every once in a while they'd come up and put a pistol to your head. You never knew whether we're going to shoot you or not,
Yeah.
Or put you up in front of a firing squad.
And you have no communication with them at all? Different language?
No.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is the 4th day now. And I was in this little village, and they were keeping me there to move me out that night, I guess. So during the day, they threw you down in this hole in the ground. It was about 4 feet deep, 5 feet deep. Bamboo logs, big logs on the top, dirt floor. And I had a guard, real vicious little bastard. And he would whack on me with his rifle butt, etc., etc. Anyway, this elderly gentleman came by, white hair. He spoke French, which I spoke some, but I didn't want him to know too much about it. So they started, what, who are you, where are you from, what you doing, and all this, and so I gave them the standard name, rank, serial number, date of birth, all of your stuff you're supposed to give them. And the old guy kept trying, and he's talking to me in French, and I understood what he was saying, but I would play dumb. And this guard's getting more and more agitated as time goes by. So finally the old man's getting ready to leave, and he gets up, and the guard runs off into the jungle there, or bush, and comes back with a club about 3 or 4 feet long, and he's going to whack me with it, try to beat the information out of me with it. And the old man told him, no, don't do that, stop.
Yeah.
So the old man walks off. I figured, I'm going to get the hell beat out of me now.
Yeah.
So,
Why do you think he stopped them?
Because they wanted to keep prisoners alive, at least at this point in time, because we had some bargaining value, probably.
So there was some internal kind of conflict. They wanted to beat you because of anger and hatred, and he knew that there was power to keeping you.
So
intact.
anyway, I'm standing. This pit is right there in front of me, and all of a sudden, he pushes me from behind. So there's nothing I can do. I land face down in the pit in the bottom, and I hear that bolt slide back on that AK-47. I'm thinking, this is it. He was screamed and yelled and all that, but he finally went away. The reason I'm telling you this is that was the 4th day. And I said to myself, okay, I've survived 4 days. I can survive another 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 months, and I always set a goal from there on, out in the future. I will survive. I can survive. On and on. So I finally, after a week of traveling, lots of different stories there, they was putting me out in front of firing squads or whatever it may be. I finally, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm laying in the back of this truck, and it's raining, and I still had a blindfold in I hadn't eaten in a week, a little bit of water, and as I said, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, the truck stops, and I look out there, and here's this big old doors with big old iron hinges, kind of like the dungeons back in kind of scary looking. And I could see on the top it said Maison Centrale, which in French means the main house, the central house. Anyway, this was the famous Hanoi Hilton, as we called it. The Vietnamese, the proper name is Hoa Lo, but this is the Hanoi Hilton, and all the rest of the main prison.
And that's where there was others.
There were others. Well, I didn't know there were others.
Yeah, at that point you didn't know.
I didn't know if I was the only survivor. They hadn't executed yet or whatever. So they threw me in the green room, and I won't go into all of the details, but
I mean, if you're comfortable with details, I'm
you are?
I'm not a squeamish person. If you got some time and you want to go into a little more details, we can always.
I can go on forever, but I
love hearing it.
Okay, well, anyway, they throw me in this green room, and we called it the green room because it was painted green, and a concrete floor, and as I said, I hadn't eaten for a week. In fact, one of the villages I was in, I still have my flight suit with the pockets. Somebody had stuffed a bunch of bananas down in my pocket. By this time they were rotted. Flies were
you had no idea.
all over me. Anyway, so they started interrogating me, and I kept giving them the same thing, and it was day after day of this. And they hadn't beat on me too badly by that time.
Was someone speaking English to you at that point?
Yeah, I did have one English-speaking interrogator.
Okay. What, if you feel comfortable, what were they?
Well, first of all, they wanted military information. What ship are you off of? What kind of weapons and all this kind of stuff. Well, you either lie to them, or you come up with some kind of a story, or you refuse to tell them. Well, at this point, I refused to tell them. So finally, after a week of this, or close to a week of it, they have what we call the rope technique. Sit on the floor with your feet out in front of you, the arms behind you. Tie your wrists together, and try to bring this up over your head to your front.
From backwards.
From backwards. And
ouch.
They can dislocate your shoulders very easily doing that.
Yeah.
Which they were in the process of doing. They didn't fully dislocate my shoulders, but they were close to it.
Wow.
So that's kind of.
And this is just week 1, 2 weeks.
This is
into
week 1.
Week 1.
Week 2, actually. It took a week to get there.
Yeah.
I arrived there on April Fool's Day. I remember that. How ironic is that?
Yeah, that's amazing that you knew even the date and everything like that.
You know,
that
you
knew.
try to keep track of something.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was now at Wallow, and we have a part of Wallow is we call Heartbreak Hotel, and it's like an old dungeon from, you know, this probably was built. Wallow was probably built. The Hanoi Hilton was built. It's built by the French back in the 18 something. Really rugged old place. Concrete peeling off the walls, everything's rusted, barrel light bulbs, etc. They throw me in this cell, and on one side of the cell it's got a concrete slab with leg irons on one end and manacles on the other end, and that's it. Concrete floor, concrete walls. It's about 7 feet wide, maybe 8-10 feet long, and I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm in there. And I don't know if I'm the only guy that's still alive or whatever. All of a sudden, things are quiet. I hear this voice from down the hallway. You American? Yeah. He gave me his name. I gave him mine. Said I'm Navy. Got shot down. And he said, memorize what's carved in the wall on the left side of your cell. And this was the tap code. I don't know if you're familiar with the tap code or.
No.
Okay, it's an arrangement of the alphabet, 5 letters across, 5 rows, 5 columns of letters. So that if you want to have to tap through a wall, and you can do it through a concrete wall 2 feet thick. A, B, C, D, E, first line. So that's the first line of the letter, whichever letter. So high is, well, actually it's.
So it's like a Morse code type of.
So that's how that was one of our basic communications.
Wow.
Ways of communicating through these concrete, thick 2 foot thick walls.
Huh.
And the other guy on the other end, if he had it, would put a cup there and listen to it.
Yeah.
That was called, that's that tap code.
The tap code. And that was that something like they came up with there, or was that something taught in basic training?
I think it was a Boy Scout thing to start with. I'd never heard of it.
That's what I didn't know if this was like, hey, if you get captured, this is one of your techniques.
Well, later on, I was kind of, as time progressed, and I went from one cell, or one person in a cell, solitary confinement, to 2 to up to 40 guys in a cell. I was usually designated as the communications guy, because we had nothing to write on, no paper, no nothing, so you had to memorize everything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting ahead of my story, but anyway, so I spent about probably a week there, and they finally kicked me out of there. It took me to a camp called the zoo, and I was in a cell there by myself in the zoo, and I was still suffering from damage from my neck because I had a lot of pain and nerve damage in my knee and my leg, and it was tough. But anyway. So I'm by myself, and I managed to be able to tap code through the wall to the 2 guys next to me, and they're both Air Force guys. And they kind of give me the scoop on what's happening, etc. So the routine was to go. You never got out of the cell except to pick up your water jug. All the water had to be boiled, because if you drink the water out of the well, it's going to kill you.
Yeah.
And whatever garbage they wanted to give you that to eat. And so I'm there by myself. Here you are in a country thousands of miles away from home by yourself. The only thing you have nothing except the right. They took my uniform, all my stuff, and a pair of pajamas, black pajamas, whatever, green or stripes or whatever. I mean, you have nothing. There's nothing to write on. There's nothing to read. There's no TV. There's nothing. So it's you and your wits, and that's it. Over time, I composed poetry and novels and remembered everything I'd tried to learn in schools, architecture and engineering and on. and try to stay in communication with everybody you possibly could, because to keep the unity of the thing.
Yeah.
But it really came down to, in the worst times, and this was not the worst of times, that, you know, it's a matter of life and death. You're either going to live or you're going to die. And if you want to live, you're going to have to eat whatever garbage you get. I've eaten dogs and rats and bugs and you name it. Whatever protein you can get into your body.
Yeah. Can't be picky.
You can't. You'll die.
Yeah. There's no choice.
And the only time the door opens is usually bad news. They're going to get the crap kicked out of you, at best, and maybe tortured if things go south.
And, you know, at this point you've been there a while. Do they even assume you have any information still?
They would pull you in every so often. If you had to give them something from if you had to have a cover story to stay alive,
Mm-hmm.
whatever lies you told them, you better remember, because they're going to come back in 6 months or a year and ask you the same question.
Yeah. Huh.
So
It's unbelievable. I
what they
truly
wanted
don't
was,
think anyone
you
can
know,
imagine.
basically military information. If you were a new shut, what they really wanted was you to flip and become a propagandist for
Yeah.
them. That's what they really wanted.
So, if you flipped, what would that have been then? They would have paraded
you
you
get
around
better
more,
conditions. You get
or-
better conditions. You're not locked up all the time. Probably
Yeah.
better food. We had a few guys that did it. I'll be honest with you. We had a few guys that did, and you know.
It's hard to blame them. You know what I mean?
Well,
you want to, but it's at the same time they didn't know they were just survival.
It happened, you know. And they kept them in a separate part of the camp. There were 6 guys, 5 guys, whatever it was.
You were pretty aware of how many people were at this camp at that point?
Our big thing was communications. How many people are here? Where are they at? You know, what are the Vietnamese interrogating about? What are they looking for?
Mm-hmm.
So communications was for both protective and also helping people keep in touch. You know, giving them something to hang on to. So it was both the support and information. And later on and throughout the years, we knew everybody in that camp. We had what we called memory banks. Okay, you have nothing to write down. So I have 6 guys. Your job is to remember the names A through D, and yours is E through whatever. So 560 guys, we knew everybody's name that was there.
And they were all at the same camp?
No, they may have been at different
Multiple
camps, but at least we know, because the zoo, and then we had the zoo annex, and we had other camps, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it was a real circus.
Yeah. Sorry to be taking so much of your time. This story is just very.
I'm taking your time.
No, I'll roll these cameras as long as you'll talk about this.
All right. Well, long story, but anyway, after about 3 months, they threw another guy in with me by the name of Charlie Baldock. He and I were roommates off and on for the next 6-7 years almost. Charlie was off the same ship I was. He was off the Enterprise, but he's a different squadron.
Mm-hmm.
He was also an A4
Later on.
Yeah. Well, we were 2 young guys, full of piss and vinegar and whatever. we gave the guards a hard time as best we could. So they wanted us, when they came to the door, to the cell door, they wanted us to bow. That was their tradition. You bow, both when they come and when they leave. Well, we didn't want to do that. So after getting beaten around enough times, we finally came up with a compromise. Charlie and I said, we'll nod and we'll give them the American greeting. And they asked, what is that? And I said, well, it just means, have a good day and all that kind of stuff, whatever. Well, some years later,
It's a dangerous game.
Jane Fonda showed up and told them what it really meant. So we paid the price eventually, but it was worth it at the time.
Oh, Jane Fonda ruined it all.
Yes, she did.
Who would have thought?
So, anyway, well, that's another story. Anyway, so Charlie and I had as much fun as you can possibly have in a prison camp.
That's a weird sentence to hear.
Yes, good, gallows humor, if you want to call it that. But anyway, So one night, after we'd been together for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, whatever, the cell door slams open middle of the night. Well, that's usually not a really good sign, because you know something's up. So they marched Charlie and I down to the headquarters building, the camp commander, and he's reading us the riot act. You're two bad guys, and you're going to get, we're going to send you to the bad guy camp. And we said, no big deal, Well, as it turns out, it was a big deal. They loaded us on this bus. We're blindfolded, handcuffed, all kind of, and we're not the only guys on the bus. There's maybe half a dozen or a dozen of us. I don't know. Over hill, over dale, Christ, it felt like forever. And we finally, the bus stops. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what time it is, but middle of the night. And they offload us. They throw us in this cell, and there's no lights. And I'm feeling around. Well, can almost touch both walls. And it's about maybe 8 feet long, something like that. And I said, Charlie, it's just a holding cell. They'll put us somewhere tomorrow. Well, turns out it wasn't a holding cell. This camp we called Briar Patch had no water, no electricity. The guards were meat eating snakes, and torture was a routine thing.
And how long before you were moved to that camp? How long were you at the other camp?
I was at the other camp about 3 months.
3 months. Okay,
Yeah.
so not long relatively
No.
for your stay.
No. I got shut down in March of '66, and we moved there probably March, April, May, June sometime.
Okay.
Somewhere around there. And it was a bad place. I mean, the only time you ever got any water other than a little bit to drink was about once a month you go out and pour a bucket of water over your head, draw it out of the well.
Yeah.
So we were a pretty stinky, nasty-looking mess with
Wow.
beards and whatever. But we were tough. You had to be tough. And as I said, the only thing that you have is your wits, and try to stay alive. We had three things. First, survive yourself. You get tougher in nails, you eat whatever you can eat, you try to exercise. I was so weak by the time I got to Briar Patch, I couldn't even do one push-up, and I was in pretty good shape, maybe 175 pounds when I got shot down. 2, try to help your other prisoners as, compassion. Well, talk more about that when we get into larger groups, etc. And 3, resist the enemy as much as you possibly could. We developed a motto which came later on, which we called return with honor. When we go home, we want to be able to hold our head up and return with honor. So anyway, we were at Briar Patch, and things were going downhill. There was a lot of torture, a lot of beatings. Occasionally they'd take you out, put you in this hole in the ground, was about 10 feet deep or so, put the lid on, and that was your quarters until they decided to let you out of there for whatever reason.
And now would this be days?
Days.
In there, weeks?
Yeah, some could be weeks, but days usually.
Just in a dug hole with a cover.
Yeah.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
So the food was just garbage. I mean, we used to call it the freeway weeds. You just go out. It looked like they just went out and picked a bunch of weeds along the ditch and threw them in a pot and boiled them. You get a chicken head or a chicken foot or whatever. There's nothing more delicious than having a chicken eyeball staring back at you. But anyway, I composed some poetry there and one thing, and all in my head, just to keep your mind going, to keep busy, whatever. Anyway, the camp commander was a guy by the name of Frenchy. We called him Frenchy because he spoke French fluently. So anyway, after I've been there about 3 or 4 months, and I figured the chances of survival of Briar Patch were about 50-50, right off the top. So I go in for an interrogation with Frenchy. And I'm sitting on this little concrete block about the size of a cement block, and he's at his desk. And I got this guard standing behind me with a fixed bayonet stick, just about 3 inches from my back. So Franchi is trying to convince me that I should cooperate with the North Vietnamese, that this is an illegal war, on and on and on, all the propaganda, you know, write a letter to the American troops in the South and say it's an illegal war and we should withdraw, and on and on and on. So I kept saying, I can't do that. I won't do that. No. I'll tell you what, and not just talking about me, but all the rest of the guys that were there, it takes some cojones to sit down in front of somebody that wants to kill you, or at least beat the hell out of you or torture you, and tell them no.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Straight on.
And I mean, even my assumption would be you could write a letter, but that's probably not going to change.
It can't do anything.
Yeah, it's not going to change.
They just want
hearts.
you to start being on their side.
Yep.
Their philosophy, their whatever. And, I kept saying, no, can't do that, and Frenchie just drones on forever and ever, and after just a couple of hours gone. And finally he stands up from his desk and he walks around, and he spoke decent English. As I said, he also spoke French. And he takes his watch off and he lays it on the desk, and he said, and they started screaming, "You Americans are the most stupid people in the world. I was the camp commander of the Japanese we captured during World War II." He was an elderly man, so I believe him. I was the camp commander. They would do whatever we told them. I was the camp commander of the French during the Indochina War. They would do whatever we told them we wanted from them. But you Americans are so stupid, you won't do anything for yourself or for us. And with that, he hit me in the side of the head so hard, I knocked me off this concrete block, and he just went into a rage. Well, next thing is over in the torture chamber, and tell you what, I was there for 3 days. Never got an ounce of sleep.
In the chamber?
In the chamber. And they kept trying to convince me that I needed to write a letter, was what they wanted. And I kept saying, no, I can't do it. After about the third day, I started having hallucinations that Charlie was sitting in the corner over there, and he and I were having a conversation, etc. And try to stay awake for that long a period of time. I'd catch myself standing up, because there was you could standing up and catch myself falling, because I fell asleep standing up.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so one day, after the third day, they came in and said, all right. So they take these old French handcuffs, pull my arm behind my back, and they lock them on your arm, right below your elbows.
Wow.
I still have some scars today. And they're old French rusty handcuffs, and they tighten them down so they cut right into the meat of your arm. And your arms are up like this. Well, as you lose strength, your arms start coming down, and then those cuffs twist and cut into your flesh even more.
Oh, so you have to hold them up to try to keep from...
Well, after about half an hour of this, or maybe 45 minutes, I don't know, I was screaming in agony. My arms were turning blue, and I'd lost all, feeling in my hands. My fingers were like cutting into my... So anyway, I finally said Uncle, and I wrote him. I had to write a piece of paper, and it was like a 2-year-old writing it, just the worst language or English punctuation I could use, but I wrote something. So that was Frenchy, and thank God when they finally took me back to my cell, quote, with Charlie, he was there to help me. I couldn't use my hands for some days.
Wow, days.
Yeah.
It's crazy the timelines on these things, we're talking months, days, and weeks of this.
I always set that goal, but, after 6-7 years, time goes, So anyway, that camp got so bad, they had a generator there that they tried to use, and they couldn't get the damn thing to run. And finally, it was so bad there with the water situation and no electricity and on, that finally the Vietnamese closed the camp and moved us all back to the zoo. The guys that were at Briar Patch. And there were probably 40 guys there, maybe a little bit more. I can remember before we moved us back, and as I said, the chances of surviving Briar Patch were about 50-50 in my book. I was standing, it was a early morning, October or November, probably November, and I'm looking down in this little concrete vat of water. And that's, you would take your steel plate and dunk that in there for after you've eaten, and that was it. That was the sanitary condition. And it was a still morning, the water was still, and I'm looking down in there, and I scared the hell out of myself. I said, I looked like I just walked out of one of the German, camps.
Kind of like an Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, whatever, and I scared myself. I would guess, and of course I didn't have a scale, but when I got shot down I weighed 175. I probably didn't weigh 115, 120 by that period of time, so I'd lost 60 pounds of basically muscle in 6 months of time. But anyway, they moved us all back to Briar Patch. As time, I'm going to kind of jump all ahead here.
Yeah, of course.
As time went by, there was always that thing of the interrogations and even torture. They killed a couple of guys during that period of time. That drove a few more crazy. As more and more guys were getting shot down, they started putting more and more guys together. They didn't really have a choice in that.
Yeah, so it's bigger groups.
So
now.
I went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 6, and that stayed that way for for a couple of years, and then later on even more. But I kind of stabilized after that period of time, and as I said, you ate whatever garbage you got because that's all there was. I can remember that we got monkey, and monkey is the most disgusting meat you can imagine. You have to hold your nose with one hand and eat with the other one. I would say kind of a disgusting thing, but
yeah,
I mean, some of that food, the old saying was gag a maggot, but what are you gonna?
It was necessity.
It was a necessity.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump forward a few years. I was in a adjoining camp we called the Zoo Annex, and I was in with 8 guys in this cell, and there were a number of different rows of cells, but they were all separated with brick walls between, no roofs on them. And one of the other cells had planned an escape. Well, as it turned out, we had what we would call probably not a tsunami, but a monsoon in North Vietnam. And some days it was, in the wintertime it could be colder than hell because all you had was, one blanket, one ratty old blanket, etc. And it was either 120 degrees outside or it was almost freezing,
And a lot of rain.
We had a lot of rain in the summer, monsoon
in the summer,
season. Yeah. Anyway. But we had an escape plan, and nobody in our cell was going to try to escape with them. There were 2 guys in this cell over here. So during the monsoon, anyway, we managed to steal some food, and we managed to steal some other clothing or got some other clothing, which we eventually were able to throw across over the walls to these guys over there. And so one Saturday night, they were going to go try to escape. So the Saturday night came and it was raining and everything worked out. They were able to get up through the ceiling of their cell and through the tile roof, and getting out of the camp was not the hardest part. It could be done. But here you are in the middle of Hanoi, 4 million people, you're 6 foot tall, white skinned, and they're 5'5" or 5'6" or 5. Nobody's over 5'8" probably. And different skin color, dogs, and I mean, everything's packed tightly together.
Yeah.
Your chance of escape, you've got 250 miles to go to a friendly territory.
And you were pretty aware of the surroundings of the camp at that point,
yeah,
decently.
Somewhat, yeah.
Started to kind of figure it out.
But most of the guys, if they tried to anyway, they had an escape. I know it was a Saturday night because Sunday morning they had a different routine. The guards would come later or whatever it was. So we had participated in helping these guys. In their case, they were captured a couple of days later. One guy was tortured to death. The other guy survived. But anyway, they locked down every part of the camp for the next 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we were locked in ourselves. You know, they let us out once a week or something like that. But no bathing, no nothing. And I mean, it's summertime. It's 120 degrees.
Yeah, in a concrete cell.
So anyway, one day the doors slam open, and one of the guard says, "Me," which was my Vietnamese name. "Me, you are allowed to bathe." Well, that's great. How about the rest of the guys? "No, you are allowed to bathe. Nobody else." I said, "Well, I can't do that." You know, this is just a standard technique of how you separate people and turn people against each other, and on and on. That's something you basically
they're trying
teach
to
you.
turn them against you.
Yeah, or you're
And
getting special favors.
Yeah, make it seem like you maybe turned or something where you had a favor.
I said, "No, I can't do that." So he goes off. About 15 minutes later, he's come back. "Me, put on your long sleeve shirt and your long pants. That means you're going to go see the camp commander or whatever." Not good.
Yeah.
So anyway, I walk into the camp commander's office, and I got this little guard behind me, right with a fixed bayonet, and I got camp officials or camp guards, and they all lined every wall. So I know this is some kind of a show, you know. So anyway, he marched me over in front of the camp commander's office, and he said, "You have disobeyed an order. You were ordered to bathe." I said, "Yeah, I'd love to, but, you know, can the rest of my guys bathe?" "Nope, just you." I said, "No, well, you know I can't do that, and I'm not going to. You have disobeyed. Get on the floor." So I dropped on the floor. "Pull your pants down." So I pulled my pants down, and all of these guards are males, of course. So I got 30 lashes with a rubber hose for refusing to take a bath. And
Wow.
So I get up finally, and I tell you what, it hurt. I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming, but I got up, and I was a wise ass somewhat in those days, and he said, "You must remember, we are the camp commander." And I said, "Well, now that I got my bath, how about a bath? Now that I got my beating, how about a bath?" He said, "Get down." He kicked me out of his office. Well,
Man, that takes a lot of balls.
yeah.
That you were just all of it, but then still even having any mental fortitude to, you know, stand up or talk back to these men is unbelievable.
You know. Yeah. Anyway, the kicker part of this thing, or so this little guard is marching me back to my cell, and he's got right behind me, and he got that damn bayonet just an inch or two from my back, and as we're marching back there, I was laughing, and he thought I was absolutely crazy. But I'll tell you the reason why I was laughing. This was my 30th birthday. Just happened to be my 30th birthday, and then my dad's side of the family is German, and a little German tradition was, as a kid, you got a little paddling on your butt on your birthday. And I said, "Yeah, I got my birthday wish."
Wow.
Little gallows humor.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
Anyway, they found out through various means, interrogations, torture, whatever, that the Americans knew a hell of a lot more than they thought the Vietnamese, because we knew the names of the people, the layouts of the camps, and all the rest of it. So, now, jumping forward.
So they got a lot of information from many other people that...
Well, they probably got somewhere along the line, you know, however they did it. But
whispers of information here and there. Yeah.
But, you know, they had to do what they called the camp regulations, and you're not allowed to communicate, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. Well, of course, we broke everything there was to break. But as time went on by, and I'll tell you that, you know, as I said, we had three things. One, you survive, whatever it takes, and you get tough, rough, you get as hard as a rock. I mean, like rawhide. There were times I'd been there this is probably 5 years, 4 years, 5 years by that time. If I could have killed two of them, I might have been willing to sacrifice my life. It was that I hated them that much.
Yeah.
But the opportunity never came. And finally, after about that period of time, 5 years, whatever it was, I came to, just through my own thinking, etc., I'm going to survive this, and when I get out of here, I want to continue my career in the Navy. I want to continue to fly, if I can, on and on and on. I don't want to carry all this garbage with me.
Don't let them define your rest of your life.
This is going to be a part of my life, but when I'm out of here, this is behind me, and I'm moving on.
Wow.
That was my theory from then on. You know, and I always was positive. There were some people that were negative, but most of them were, we will survive this somehow. Yeah. So anyway, that was just me. We had three things: stay alive, help your other prisoners to stay alive, and resist the Vietnamese in every way you possibly could. I mean, we stole everything we could find to steal. We communicated, tried to keep everybody on the same path. One of the cells I was in were 4 guys. One guy, I don't know how he ever got there, because you're not supposed to be able to be in the military if you have asthma. He would have these asthma attacks, and the other 3 of us would have to sit up all night and give him, you know, CPR or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, etc., keep him going. We had guys that had severe back injuries due to ejections, etc., sciatic nerve. All you could do was, you know, try to massage their backs or legs or whatever it was, just to try to relieve. There basically was no medical treatment, period. Now, in McCain's name, and I'm not knocking McCain or whatever, just having him was a propaganda thing for them, because his father was the senior guy in all of Southeast Asia as far as military is concerned.
Okay.
It wasn't McCain. It was McCain's name.
Yeah. It was his dad that kind of put him into
a harder position. So they kept him alive. They probably would have died otherwise. It's on and on. So yourself, your companions, your fellow prisoners, take care of them, feed them if you can. You know, we divided up all of the food just as evenly as we possibly could. Take care of the sick or the wounded, whatever it may be, and resist the enemy in every way you possibly could. A couple of examples. I gave you one there with this guy. I was probably about 5 years into this. By now, I was in part of the Hanoi Hilton, but it was part of Wallow. But they were much larger cells, and there were probably 40 of us in this one cell. All different. We have Navy guys, aviators, Air Force, a few scattering of Marines, a couple of CIA guys from Air America that got shot down in Laos or wherever it may be. They finally pulled them over. Anyway, they threw the cell door open one day, and they threw these 2 guys in. One guy was about 6'4", and if he weighed 100 pounds, he was a scarecrow.
Yeah.
The other guy was basically the same shape, not on his face. And they had just given up. They quit eating. They just said, "We're done." You know, they quit eating. Well, there's a bunch of us younger guys that said, "Well, you aren't going to die on our watch. We're going to keep you alive. You are going to eat." "No." "Yes, you will." So food would come. 4 or 5 of us jump on top of them, get them on the floor.
Wow.
Put food in their mouth. They throw it up, we gather it up, and put it right back in again. After about 3 or 4 sessions of this, they changed their mind, because we said, you will eat one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean,
you might as well eat it the first time.
You saved those guys' lives.
And they're still walking around today.
Kept them afloat.
So that's the compassion side of it.
Yeah, and all the while, the extra food, you could have been like, well, cool.
Yeah.
You're not going to eat, you know.
Well, toward the end of our time over there, we started getting more and more people together. After Ho Chi Minh died in 1969, that would have been 5 years, 3 years for me, things changed a little bit. It was almost imperceptible, but they changed a little bit. The guards couldn't just open the door and beat the crap out of you whenever they felt like it. They could if they got direction to do so, and they would. And the torture kind of tapered off. Because we told them right flat to their face, "You're not going to get a word out of me unless you torture me, and then you might not get anything." We had our own on top of the Navy or military regulations as far as what you can say, we had what we call the plums, which were our internal regulations as to what you could or could not do. And one of them was, if you get to the point where you're tortured to the point where you feel you can't go on any further, you have, only the individual knows when that point is. If they break you, they're going to get everything they want. Either military information or propaganda-wise. You're just going to be a tool if you let that happen.
Yeah.
So you were the only one that can make that decision when that could happen. But if not, you better have a cover story. The same story you told them before.
So you were
you gave them one.
basically trying to empower all of these people mentally to be stronger than the guards can torture.
So we told them, you're not getting anything out of me unless you torture me.
Yeah.
And then you may not get anything. So anyway, not to make
it's unbelievable.
believe it, but so anyway, that was how things were going. And then of course in 1970 they tried. I was in an outlying camp. They had little camps all over around Hanoi, and even had one up on the Chinese border. They had Briar Patch about 40-50 miles out of the city. I was in another camp. Most everybody was back at Wallow, and unbeknownst to us, they tried to rescue some guys from one of the camps outlying camps. That didn't work out. But anyway, they grabbed everybody, took us all back to Wallow. My big thing was I was in a big group of people, but for the most part, the junior officers ran everything. Communications. We'd get up and we had the tap code. We had all kinds of different codes. We'd climb up in the windows, use a fan or use your fingers or whatever it may be, Morse code, on and on, because communications was vital. And we'd want to talk to our senior ranking officers who were most often kept in solitary confinement, etc. I was also part of a secret escape committee. Nobody in that cell except me knew that, and there was only one guy in the cell next to me who was my counterpart. And we were able to, we had a group that was an escape committee to plan escapes if appropriate, but we still had to get the permission of our senior ranking officer to
So
do
you
it.
were still following rank, even at that time.
Every camp, every day, it was followed military rank.
Wow.
If there were two of us, one guy was senior.
That's interesting. It's crazy that it still, holds up even
as I said,
5 years into
we're a ratty-looking
captivity.
group, unshaven, unkempt, but it was the tightest and the strongest military organization I've ever been in. I have been in, fortunately, throughout my Navy flying career, I've been in some of the top-notch squadrons in the Navy. Won all kinds of awards, all kinds of different things. And but I'll take that 500 guys that were there, because they were the best there was.
Yeah, that's
I mean, they were all still warriors. We didn't have any weapons, but we were still warriors,
Yeah, it was. That's an amazing group of people to sustain that, and most of them were there for quite a long time as well.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7 years. There was one guy who was there longer than I was. A couple of guys. Well, many guys. I figured I was, looking back on it and counting, I was about the 60th guy that was shot down.
Okay,
So it was earlier in the war, and there were finally around 560 of us there. But so,
wow.
The last year or so, things started to improve. We started getting some letters from home, just short 5-line, and we were able to write less, and maybe once every month or 2 months or something. Started getting some Red Cross packages.
So they were aware that you were there.
Well, they had by this time the Vietnamese had realized, because of all the bad press they were getting around the world, how badly they were treating prisoners, etc., etc. Early in the war, they told us, we're going to execute you guys. And I believe they thought they were. But once it hit the fan, then as time went on, toward the end, they started feeding us canned fish from Russia and stuff like that to try to fatten us up. which I did. I probably gained, when I was released, maybe weighed around 140 pounds.
Okay.
But I could do 500 sit-ups a day, 500 push-ups a day. I was an exercise freak.
Oh, yeah, there's not much to do.
No, not a lot to do. Plus, I was the barber.
Okay.
I cut hair, probably hundreds of people every. I don't know.
Interesting.
And they had communication, whatever, all kinds of different stuff. But anyway, well, that's what kept us going. I learned to speak fluent French and, fluent Spanish, French passable. I've forgotten a lot of it now, but different guys. Everybody, you put 40 guys together, everybody's got a unique background. One guy taught Spanish, one guy taught French, one guy taught judo, and on and on and on.
So you end up learning something from a lot of people.
And that was how we kept our minds busy.
Yeah.
You had to keep your mind going. As I say, I have a poem that I composed during the time I was there. It's been published, actually. But the only reason I did it was to keep my mind active.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had to memorize it because I didn't have anything to write it down on. And but over the years, I finally, completed it. But it was just a mind exercise.
Yeah. That's unbelievable.
Well, anyway, to get back to the story, so things got better. Eventually, and I'm skipping a lot, but the day came, and I was in camp in Wallow, the Hanoi Hilton, and the guards were not allowed to speak to us. They were told by their camp commander, "You get caught, your head's going to be missing."
And that was the whole time there? They never spoke?
We had
They never
one guy.
spoke to you?
We had one guy in one camp who said he was a taxi driver in Saigon. He spoke some English, and he would come by every once in a while at 2 o'clock in the morning if he was a night guard or something. He'd say a little bit, but the rest of them, no. And we didn't learn very much Vietnamese either.
The taxi driver couldn't keep shut. He had to
Couldn't
talk.
keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, of course.
So he comes by and he says, Lee Duc-To, who was their foreign minister, and Kissinger, Paris, and he makes a sign like they're signing some paperwork. During that period of time, the only time we ever got any new news was when some new guy got shot down. And some periods of time, I know from 69 to 71, they quit flying. They quit bombing North Vietnam. And so we got no new income of prisoners, etc. Well, in 70, fall or winter of 72, early spring of 73, they started the B-52 bombing Hanoi, etc., etc. And that really was what caused the Vietnamese to finally sign the agreement. The agreement was that they would release the prisoners. The Americans would leave Vietnam.
That was the final amount of pressure put on them, was to...
Well, they realized it, and they've said themselves since, at that point in time, we were destroying Hanoi and all around it. They were on their last foot.
Yeah. Would that have been Nixon then that ramped it up?
It was Nixon, yeah.
Okay.
I can remember I was in Wallow, Hanoi Hilton, when the B-52 bombings would start, and it would start usually around midnight every night. And you could hear them droning on for hours. And you would land on a bunk, on a concrete slab, and your bed was a concrete slab and a wooden pallet you laid on, and you could feel it moving just like you're on a ship from the bomb explosions, And you'd see the guards come in the next morning and their eyes were like this, they saw a whole block of Hanoi leveled to the ground that they came in on their bicycle.
Oh my gosh.
And they realized that they couldn't go on any longer with that situation. We lost 16 B-52s over there, and there was a crew of, I think, 8 or 10 on each one.
Oh wow. I didn't
realize it until after the war there were that many shot down, but the new shoot downs with B-52 guys and some other scattering of people that they kept them pretty much separate. And there were a lot of guys that were injured, burns, etc. They kept them separate, and they released them to go back to a couple of guys I mentioned before. John McCain, he was in the camp there, and I was never in the same cell with John. But after we were released, which I'll cover in a little bit, he and I were in the same squadron in Jacksonville, Florida. And he and his wife, I knew his wife well, and he and I used to travel together quite a bit, so we had a good friendship.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
He had a lot of damage.
he had a lot of,
Post-war.
yeah, he couldn't raise his shoulder any higher than
Yeah.
this. He had, he ejected from an A4, the same airplane I flew, right over the city of Hanoi. Got hit by a missile. Yeah, he couldn't raise his arm any higher than this. And
Yeah.
so he couldn't fly any longer.
So Operation Homecoming, when did
That
that
would have
come
been-
about for you? When did they
Well,
tell you about
Operation
it?
Homecoming, because of the time I'd spent there, I was in the first group to come out. So I'd go back to this. Let me back up track a little bit.
Yep.
This guy I mentioned to my flight instructor, Mad Dog Woods, in Meridian, Mississippi. Later on, he got shot down too. So we met in Hanoi, and I said, we were joking. I said, Mad Dog, what is it you didn't teach me? And he said, well, whatever it was, I never learned it myself. And yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
he to get back to it, so the guard comes and he makes that notion. So a few days later, they pull us all out in the middle of the camp there, this big open area, parade ground, whatever you want to call it. And they have to, by law, they have to read the agreement to us. And we're all in formation and whatever, you know, we're a bunch of raggedy looking guys. But we'd already passed the word through the system. We're not going to use hoop and holler and scream and everything. Of course, that's what they want us to do, etc. We're going to stay in ranks and keep our mouths shut.
Yeah.
So they read the whole thing through us, so that says at some point in time they're going to release us, but who knows when. So anyway, I'm back in the cell. A couple of weeks pass or whatever, a few days, whatever, I don't remember. So the night of the 12th of February, 1973, about midnight, the cell door slams open. In come the Vietnamese with shoes, jackets, pants, you know, our go-home clothes, homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't get any sleep that night. Next morning, they marched us out of the camp, and for the first time I went out without a blindfold and handcuffs or my arms wired behind my back, got on one of their buses, and they drove us through Hanoi out to their joint military civilian airfield called Geelong. Anyway, so we're sitting in the buses on this one side of the airport, away from everybody else. And they gave us Vietnamese cigarettes and a warm beer. And sitting there in this bus, and all of a sudden I see this Air Force Silver 141 come in and land. It's got a big American flag on the tail. First time I'd seen the American flag in 7 years or longer.
Yeah.
Anyway, they finally drive us around to the other side of the field, and they have it set up. They have these long tables. The Vietnamese on one side, and the American or U.S. Air Force on the other side, and this is the prisoners exchange. So everybody that's on the first release group, so which is the guys that have been there longer and the wounded, injured, that needed medical care.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally, they offload us in the bus, and we're standing in line of two, and I finally get through the Vietnamese, and they got to sign me off, you know, they turn me over, and the Americans got to accept me and all that other kind of stuff, and get to the end of this, and there's this burly Air Force sergeant takes me by the shoulder, and we're walking out to this 141. He said, we better get out of here before they change their mind. I said, you be running to stay up with me, buddy. So we get on to 141. And we finally get out there, and I remember we're on the airplane. I'm riding backwards in the airplane and looking out the window, and there's the coastline of Vietnam as we pass over it. And I got a cold shiver down my back, and I said, I'll never be back here again. I've been that close to dying a dozen times, and I'm not going to ever be back. Well, a lot of guys have gone back, and they've been treated royally, and so, but
Just to go back to.
They went back, you know, three or four three generations back, and they've been treated great, you know. And back to Wallow. Long story short, I've had some of my wife is Danish. I've had a lot of my family that have visited Hanoi and Thailand and all the rest of the.
Yeah.
In Hanoi now, they've torn down the vast majority of the old Hanoi Hilton, Wallow, but they kept a certain section of it for their museum. And so I've been told there's a picture of me in there. It goes back to when, for the first period, a couple of years, my parents didn't know I was alive. I was listed missing, but later confirmed to be. One of the reasons is I have a tattoo on my upper arm, and there was a picture of me with this tattoo, and my parents were called to come to Washington and positively identify the picture. It had been taken by a French photographer.
Yeah, so a war
Le Mans,
photographer out there.
Yeah.
And that was the first multiple years into.
Confirmation I was alive.
And this was years into you being there
Yeah.
at that point. Wow, that's probably a really relieving sight, but also a terrifying one for your parents to see.
Yeah.
You know, so much relief that you're alive, but so much guilt that you're missing still.
Yeah. So anyway, I was in the first group to come back, and as I say, you know, it was just, you know, it was like waking up from a nightmare. You know, is it real? You know, you just you're just overcome by, you know, everything. You know, we landed in the Philippines, of course, and offloaded the airplane. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the pictures of guys getting off the airplanes.
I believe I have.
Yeah. So we had to go to the Air Force Base there. It's no longer there. The airfield is no longer there, but Clark Air Force Base, to the hospital. And so they had an exchange and all kinds of stuff, and they treated us royally. But anyway, so we were allowed to eat in the cafeteria at midnight by the time we got there. And here's guys that, you know, we hadn't had any dairy products or any ice cream or any milk or juice or anything for however long you've been there. So there was guys that didn't have any teeth left anymore that wanted steak and eggs. And so we all
sad.
Brand new uniforms and everything, and got a chance to call home. I did. I was briefed by my parents had been divorced during the period of time I was there, and some other whatever happened in individual families, they were debriefed at that point.
It's a long period of time.
Yeah,
a lot happens.
It was a very long period of time, and you know, a lot of things happened, divorces and deaths in the family, etc., etc. So anyway, from there, from Clark, I was there a couple of days. Went from there to Hawaii, and then to California, and just happened to be the admiral who was the head of the Atlantic Fleet aircraft carriers. He's 3-star. His airplane was there, and I got a ride back with the admiral to Jacksonville, Florida. So I was the first guy back to the state of Florida to. So I spent a week at the hospital up in Jacksonville. After the first couple of days, I could come and go as I chose.
Yeah.
There was a great captain who was in charge of the hospital, but they didn't know what to expect. On board the 141s coming out, they had nurses, they had baby food and all the rest of it. We went that crap. We give us some steak and eggs, or you know, give us some real American food.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, of course, they don't know what they're.
No, they had no idea.
They don't know what they're getting back.
A bunch of insane people or whatever, you know.
I think that would be justified to be.
Well, there were 6 guys.
Insane.
There were 6 guys that I know of who never made it out of there, and those 6 guys went crazy.
Yeah.
Either through torture or just whatever, but they were crazy, and the Vietnamese were never going to release them. And so, unfortunately, yeah.
But I think what the number was, 560.
It's roughly around that. It was a different, but somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Now, there were another 100 guys in South Vietnam, the Army guys, Marines, a few Marines. So that brings it up. There were about 100 guys that died in captivity, both North and South.
Okay.
So 100 died, 560 came out of the North, about 100 out of the South, and then there were probably another 100. There were 770 or something like that. There were civilians that were captured, guys and women actually.
Yeah.
Nurses. We had captured here or there. So when it was all over with, there were 3 different airlifts out of Hanoi. I was on the first one, and then a month later there was a second one, and then there was a third one. So
Wow, a month in between the two.
a month in between. So, and of course, I had all kinds of interviews in Jacksonville and everything. And we told them what we could tell them, but I couldn't tell them too much because I still got my buddies are back in the slammer, back in Hanoi.
Yeah. Until everything's
until
until
everything is
everyone's
over
out,
with.
you don't want to.
Well, I was fortunate. Continue story. I was fortunate enough that I went through every medical test known to mankind right there at the hospital, and was deemed capable of returning to jet flying.
That's unbelievable that they allowed that as well.
I had every test. There were a small number of us, probably maybe 12 max, that went back to carrier flying.
Yeah. How long after were you back?
I spent a week in the hospital there at Jacksonville being debriefed. They sent teams down from Washington, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time doing all the medical testing, et cetera. Then I had to take 3 months with R&R, mandatory rest and relaxation. All right. So I went to Europe. That's when I met my wife and later my future wife, and then came back, and I had to go back to Kingsville, Texas, and fortunately fly the A4 again. Well, after an hour in the air, I felt like I'd never gotten out of the airplane. So
Wow.
And then I went back to flying an airplane called the A7 Corsair, which I flew for next cruises and time. So I spent another 12 years in the Navy.
12
flying
years.
A4s and then combat ready squadrons.
Yeah.
And a few times we thought we were going to get into combat. But then the last 4 years I spent at the Pacific Missile Test Center in California. I was the head aircraft maintenance, so we had about 1,000 people in the maintenance department. And we had 120 airplanes or something like that to maintain.
And now testing.
Plus I was a test pilot primarily for the Tomahawk cruise missile,
Okay.
the first cruise missile. Live fire tests and submarines and on and on and on. And a bunch of other different weapon systems, laser guided weapons, electronics weapons, etc., etc.
The things that are really in place now.
So anyway, I flew right up to the day I left the service, and I flew a multi-engine jet, big jet aircraft, single seat jet aircraft, multi-engine prop and single seat. So I did a lot of flying, and they wanted me to go to the Pentagon, and I didn't want to go.
They wanted you to continue your service?
Well, I could stay for as long. I just said, no, I think I'm not interested in going to the Pentagon.
Well, I'm sure there was a million contractors trying to get you to Raytheon, Lockheed.
That was it. I didn't want to go to the Pentagon for various reasons, but I had my whole background was in weapons systems or in aircraft maintenance, because I'd been in maintenance, been a head maintenance officer of squadrons and at Point Magoo and weapons systems testing and all that. So there were several aerospace companies that I had talked to about getting a job. I could have gone with the airlines, but at that point in time, it was like the roller coaster. They're either hiring or they're not, etc.
Yeah.
And I had to fly in the right first officer in the right seat for a long period of time. Plus the pay was crap. So I just decided, nah, I don't want to do that. So I went to work for aerospace business and senior management in there, and then I left and came back to Florida and started the stained glass business.
Yeah, that one, I was reading that and I was a little confused by the stained glass thing, because,
that's a long story. You don't want to...
So to talk about your service a little more, when you were on standby for the Iranian crisis, that seemed like a big one that was potentially going to have to unfold. And that was such a big story.
As you know, if you've read the history there, we were ready to go. The ship was ready to go into combat immediately. In fact, the aircraft had all been prepped. The helicopters crashed in the desert. They just scrubbed the whole thing. I was on the Coral Sea at the time. We sat in the Indian Ocean for the next 100 days. We spent 120 days at sea without ever going into port.
Just waiting
to see what was going to happen.
Wow. And I know there was a whole attempt to potentially have to rescue them in a stadium.
Well, that's what this was all about.
Interesting. And that was a modified airplane?
Well, what happened was the helicopters were involved in this. It was Army helicopters, and I don't remember the whole story, but in the middle of the night they had a collision between a couple of helicopters, crashed. They had to call off the whole thing. So, you know, I was on the Coral Sea. We came back. I was stationed in California at that time. So, just an unfortunate thing. Who knows how it would have turned out?
Yeah. Well, this was awesome. This was awesome in the way of how well you can recall your story, and I appreciate you so much given that. I'm sure that was it's very heavy, I'd imagine, to recall.
Yeah, well, I've done it over the years, and I don't mind talking about it. As I said, I had that epiphany, if you will, or decision I made at some point in time that when I leave Vietnam, I'm closing that chapter, and, you know, it'll always be part of my life, but
yeah,
I close that chapter of the book, and I'm charging on to whatever's out there in the future.
That's unbelievable, man. It's truly unreal. Such a great story, so much, I mean, not a great story, but such a truly breathtaking story that you guys were able to make it through that and power through that with such
Well, I was
strength.
fortunate, you know, even having been shot down, but, you know, I lost some good friends over there, good friends in my squadrons, and knew a lot of people that names wound up on the wall there.
Yep.
And that's another issue, but I was fortunate in many ways, more fortunate than some.
I've been to both the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, and I actually was privileged enough to lay the wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in my middle school days. You know, we went there, and that just brings back all this. You know what I mean? It's the V-shaped memorial that they have is,
well, one of the things is, unfortunately, that because of the mood of the country, of course, I didn't know much about it at the point of time I was released. We came back as heroes. The guys that were there, you know, our whole motto was return with honor. We want to come back, and, you know, we were treated like heroes, even though we never really considered ourselves heroes. You know, we did our job, and it was a tough one, but the stories of some of the guys that came back and how they were poorly treated, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's the country's finally gotten over it for the most part, I guess, but you have to realize, you know, you're the average guy, the average soldier or Marine or whatever. You go follow orders. It's not your decision to be there or not be there.
of course.
And, you know.
Has your mood changed about the war since coming back? Has your thoughts on it?
Well, I've always thought it was necessary to do it. Now, you know, I'm not a crazy about war, but there are some wars that need to be fought and some that don't. It's always been my opinion.
Yeah.
But my opinion also is, if you plan on doing it, you better go plan to win. Which unfortunately has not been the case in some areas.
Yeah, I had a friend who was a Marine in Afghanistan, and he says, since Vietnam, America's not designed to win a war because of rules of engagement.
It's a big part of it.
And, you know, he felt slightly frustrated by that because of
I
the
was on
circumstances.
an aircraft carrier on the Saratoga in the Mediterranean after I came back from Vietnam, and we were out there doing the same stupid stuff we did in Vietnam, and I'm thinking, did we learn anything?
Yeah.
You know?
You would have thought, right?
Yeah. You know, we're doing the same stupid stuff. Why didn't we learn anything about what we're doing, tactics or whatever it may be? And this was just tactics.
Yeah.
But,
Wow.
you know.
Well, man, I'll let you get out of here. Thank you so much for this. Maybe eventually we'll do a follow-up, because I feel like we only got to your first stint, and then there's probably so much interest in even the missile testing and some of your Middle East stuff. So maybe we'll have to pick this up again. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate your
Appreciate
service.
it. Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time.